I'm Haley B. Miller, and this is Ohio Politics Explained, a podcast where you give us 15 minutes and we give you all the news you need to sound smart and impress your friends. Welcome to another episode of Ohio Politics Explained. Today, we'll get you ready for Tuesday's election and break down what Issue 2 is all about. We'll also discuss problems with the Ohio Civil Rights Commission, a bill that could revamp state energy policy, and the latest with the Cleveland Browns Stadium. Joining me today for quite the agenda is Jesse Bomer.
Happy pre-election day, mid-budget day.
Before we get going, my semi-regular plug. If you enjoy OPE, a review or rating on Apple Podcasts is always a huge help for us. So let's start with the election. Ohio voters have a bunch of local issues and primaries before them on Tuesday's ballot. But there's also Issue 2. And no, it's not about marijuana. With Issue 2, the state is asking voters to extend funding for a public works program that's been in place since the 80s. This money is all about improving infrastructure, roads, bridges, water treatment systems, that kind of thing. Jesse, explain a little bit more about the state's ask and why we're doing this now.
Yeah, we're doing this now because we've kind of run out on the last time we renewed it. So this was initially approved by voters in 1987, incidentally the same year I was born. And then it's been renewed 3 times since then. And basically the ask is for Ohio to be able to issue general obligation bonds to obtain some money, about $250 million a year to spend over the next 10 years on these projects. So infrastructure, roads, culverts, flooding issues, the things that people care about but are not like giant headline worthy. I definitely had someone call me and say, well, wasn't the federal infrastructure bill supposed to solve some of these problems? And the bill that Congress passed was more for things like the Brent Spence Bridge, whereas this might be for a bridge in a local township.
Yeah, and the way this works, right, is that once this money exists, assuming Issue 2 passes next week, local governments can then request what they need from the state.
Yeah, so the way it works is local townships, municipalities, cities, counties can apply for this money. There's actually like a local group of people that review the applications and decide which ones get put forward. And then the Ohio Public Works Commission is the people who actually make the deals and implement it. And they have done about 19,000, 18,000 local projects with this money since the 1980s. And so this Issue 2 has a lot of support from everyone, from local elected officials to the Ohio Chamber of Commerce. And there isn't really an organized opposition to this measure at this point.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. I feel like infrastructure and having good roads is generally bipartisan. Everyone can kind of get on board with that. Is there much of a risk that this doesn't pass next week? I mean, I think, it's pretty easily been approved previous times that it's been re-upped.
Yeah, this is like much less controversial than other ballot initiatives we've covered recently on marijuana and abortion and redistricting and whether we should amend the Constitution to make it harder to amend the Constitution.
Yeah.
So yeah, this one's just not as like thrilling in that regard, but it's also a little bit closer to home for a lot of people. There were a number of lawmakers, I believe there were 5 in total, who voted against putting this on the ballot, but that was a very small number of the total number of bipartisan legislators that supported putting this up for a vote.
And speaking of controversial, as you have noted, Issue 2 has nothing to do with the Brown Stadium, which we will talk about more in a little bit, but this is not money to pay for that.
Yeah, I think lawmakers found themselves in a bit of an awkward position because they approved this measure. It was put on the ballot here in May. And then like months later, this Cleveland Browns bond project came up and they're unrelated, but being discussed in the news at the same time. But if you look at Issue 2, it lays out what can be funded with this money, and sports stadiums are not on the list.
Our next topic is the Ohio Civil Rights Commission. This commission is supposed to investigate workplace discrimination, but ironically has problems of its own. Top executives have left or been fired since the current director, Angela Phelps White, took over in 2020. Current and former employees say Phelps White bullied and retaliated against them. A lot of this has come out in lawsuits. What else have people said about the commission and its leadership?
Yeah, so a lot of the concerns are centered around Angela Phelps White, who is the leader of this commission. And like you already said, this is a commission that is supposed to investigate workplace discrimination. And so there is a bit of irony that there's so many workplace discrimination issues being alleged here. Our colleague Laura Bischoff really dug into it, but there are different people who are just saying, it's a nightmare to be working there. It's just a terrible work environment. A lot of turnover is usually not a great sign for a healthy workforce. And I think people know that from their own personal workplaces. So sometimes where there's smoke, there's fire on these things. I will say that, the board pushed back against the concerns from employees and former employees.
And something Laura also pointed out in her story is that this is happening at a time where the commission is dealing with a lot more complaints and investigations. So regardless of whether there's merit to some of the claims of the employees, there's a lot of drama and turmoil. And I would suspect that is making it harder for them to do the job that the state requires them to be doing.
Yeah, the state lawmakers made a change that took effect in 2021 that effectively the goal was to cut the amount of time that employees have to wait for these claims, to reduce it from 6 years to 2 years. And that's a great idea. I think everyone wants to be able to resolve these issues quicker, but I think that's added a tremendous amount of work to this agency while it is, facing some internal struggles as well.
Let's pivot to energy policy. Ohio lawmakers okayed legislation to eliminate fees on electric bills that were paying for 2 coal plants, including one in Indiana. These fees were part of House Bill 6, which we all know as the bill that was central to Ohio's biggest bribery scandal. This bill does a lot more than just the fees, though. Walk us through what all they're trying to do here.
Yeah, so essentially Ohio lawmakers are concerned that there isn't going to be enough energy, enough power going forward, especially as we have artificial intelligence, data centers, these entities that are taking a tremendous amount of electricity and power in the state of Ohio. And so to try to meet that demand, they're trying to make it a more attractive state to generate energy. So that's reducing taxes on certain new business property. They are going to require utilities to publish heat maps of their capacity. So you could see, are we really close? Should I be concerned about, a brownout or something like that going forward? Creating priority investment areas where you can kind of attract those energy generators, in addition to getting rid of the OVEC fees, which I think was the main headline for a lot of us. They are eliminating this solar energy fee that wasn't little used. It was another one of those kind of pot sweeteners to pass House Bill 6, but they're going to use that money to go to school districts for any energy conservation efforts. There was a little bit of debate about where to put that pot of money. So some of the other things are just a little bit more transparency for the utilities. They want to get rid of these things called electric security plans, which made it a little bit less review when you're adding fees and other things to customers' bills. And so they want to have them more regularly before the regulators and, making sure that anything that we're charging customers, there's a reason for that to be on there.
Yeah, this is a really interesting, very much a bipartisan piece of legislation. It was unanimously passed in the Senate last week. I think the vote in the House was the same or similar. I think there was a lot in here that both Republicans and Democrats liked. Democrats especially have been trying to get rid of these coal plant fees for a long time and kind of get rid of some of the final vestiges of House Bill 6 that were still lingering. So definitely a win for people who had been pushing for that.
Yeah, I got press releases from the Ohio Environmental Council to Free Market Capitalist. It was a really interesting moment because utilities have had a lot of power and influence at the State House. The epitome of that, of course, being First Energy being able to commit a pay-to-play bribery scandal at the Ohio State House involving the former Speaker of the House, who Larry Householder was later sentenced to 20 years in prison. So, which is not to say that every utility was operating in that world, but just in general, they've had a lot of power and influence at the State House.
Our final topic is the Browns. An analysis from the Legislative Service Commission found the team overstated the impact of building a new stadium in Brook Park. The Ohio House budget includes a $600 million bond for the project, which backers say would transform the local economy. But maybe not, apparently.
Yeah, so the Legislative Service Commission, which is like not an agency you've probably heard of, but they're the people who take a look at each bill and kind of analyze what is the financial impact on Ohioans, what is the legal impact on Ohioans. And so the top Senate Democrat requested answers to a few questions about the Browns and went through what the Haslam Sports Group, the people, the Haslams own the Browns, and just kind of check their math a little bit. One of the challenges was they didn't have the underlying numbers that the Haslams were using to say like how great this is going to be for Cuyahoga County and just the general area. So that was part of the challenge. But when they were just like going through the numbers, they were saying that in addition to sold out Browns games, which is not a guarantee given the current sports prowess of the Cleveland Browns, they would have to have 21 other sold out events in order to hit some of the numbers that the Browns were projecting.
Yeah, and I think it'll be a document that opponents of this bond look at as the Senate continues to look at the budget and debate what they want to do. As a reminder, the House passed their budget, so it's in the Senate's court now. And I'm not totally sure the Senate, both Republicans and Democrats, are sold on this bond for the team. I think, it sounds like both the Senate president and Senate minority leader said this week that they're, looking at everything, checking the team's math, and it sounds like they might come up with some other alternatives.
Yeah, and Governor Mike DeWine has not been shy about saying this is not how he wants to go about it. He initially proposed doubling the tax on sports gambling in order to pay for this. Now, I don't know if that's what the Senate's going to go with either, but the governor and then also his budget department are saying the state doesn't have the money for a project like this. And the concern is also there are other groups like the Bengals at Paycor Stadium looking for renovations, or FC Cincinnati, or just others. There are more than the Browns in the state of Ohio. And so if you give one team something, is everyone else going to come running?
And one more thing before you go. After a bunch of legal hurdles, advocates who want to end qualified immunity can finally start collecting signatures for a proposed constitutional amendment. The group hopes to get on the ballot in 2026.
Yeah, this has been kind of a long road to get here. And then to get to the 2026 ballot, it's going to be a long road to go. So we'll be keeping an eye on this one.